Ethiopians went to the polls Monday as the country's northern Tigray region faces one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. The election is seen as a first public test for Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He came into power in 2018, ending decades of authoritarian rule. Elections for a new parliament have been delayed twice due to the coronavirus pandemic and logistical constraints. But not everyone is taking part in today's vote. Elections are not being held in 20% of the country, including for all 38 seats in Tigray. The fighting in Tigray has killed thousands of people and displaced millions since last November. The United Nations says more than 350,000 people in the conflict-torn region are starving. For more on this, let's bring in Gavin. She is a senior fellow for Africa Studies for the Council on Foreign Relations. Michelle, welcome. It's great to have you with us. Tell us first why this election is so important for Ethiopia and how legitimate can it really be when more than 60 constituencies are not even taking part?
Well, thank you for having me. This election had been slated to be sort of a turning of the page for Ethiopia, a step forward in the reform agenda that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had introduced when he ascended to power in 2018. But what it's turned into is, to some degree, a distraction, given the sheer number of constituencies, as you mentioned, who won't be voting, but also the degree of violence in the country as a whole. Some people will be voting in regions that are essentially under martial law. The fact that major opposition parties in Oromia are boycotting the election. Essentially, the results are not in question. Everyone expects the Prime Minister's Prosperity Party to win, but it's highly unlikely that these elections will resolve the underlying political tensions in Ethiopia that are leading to this kind of violence.
And does the Prime Minister face any sort of opposition in this election?
Well, there are absolutely opposition parties, but some are boycotting, others are in disarray. It's hard to imagine that he will not emerge victorious, but these elections are unlikely to grant him the kind of legitimacy and popular mandate that I think he would be seeking and would wish to have.
And of course, he's already facing international criticism over alleged, rights violations in the Tigray conflict. Would his victory in the election mean anything for the northern region or for the country as a whole in terms of bringing that conflict to any sort of resolution?
Well, it's highly unlikely. At this point, the Ethiopian government doesn't really recognize the TPLF. They believe that this is a terrorist organization, totally illegitimate. And it's hard to see the conflict in Tigray ending without some kind of negotiated solution. Of course, you can't negotiate with a party you've completely delegitimized. So these elections, again, don't solve that problem. They don't really resolve a set of questions about the nature of ethnic federalism in the country. And so it's just highly unlikely that the violence that we see, not just in Tigray, but around Ethiopia, will be quelled by any result in this electoral process.
And of course, we know, meanwhile, the Ethiopian people are suffering. The government says aid is being delivered to people in need of food and denies reports of a famine in Tigray. What is the truth?
Well, the truth is hard to come by because access is so difficult in Tigray. But there are numerous reports of atrocities being committed against civilians that are highly credible. There is no question that these are occurring. And I think that the UN would not have been as definitive as statements were in the past couple of weeks about the fact that people are living in famine right now. It's very clear that aid is being intercepted by armed groups and not being delivered to the civilians who need it. It's equally clear that people are being intimidated, directly told by armed forces not to plant, not to cultivate their crops. So it's likely to get worse before it gets better.
Mm-hmm. And there have been reports from both sides in the Tigray conflict of, sexual violence and systemic rape as a weapon of war. What is being done to address that issue?
Well, you're absolutely right. And the reports are horrifying and they are consistent and they are credible. But what's being done to address any of this violence, right? You have at this point at least four different armed groups fighting in Tigray. You've got the Tigrayan forces, you've got Ethiopian federal forces, you have the Eritrean forces who have crossed the border and continue to be in Tigray despite Prime Minister Abiy's commitment to get them out. And you have militia forces, largely from the Amhara community in Ethiopia. So while there are investigations underway, joint Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and UN investigations, while the AU has now committed to investigate, in terms of actually stopping this violence against civilians, there aren't any very good solutions yet.
Well, Michelle, Gavin, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you sharing your insight with us.
Thank you.